Hello, and welcome to the 6th episode of Mixed Media Reviews Season 3. My name is Kelsey, and today I'll be talking about a movie. This week's movie is Teen Wolf, the movie. Yes, I am starting with the movie and not the TV show. But here's the thing. This movie is terrible, and I really need to talk about it. Oh boy, I really need to talk about it. Okay, so I first knew about Teen Wolf because I had sat in the panels at Comic-Con, and my friends and I found it absolutely hilarious as the cast had such good chemistry on stage and they were always so funny. So we decided we finally check it out. I think it was maybe during season 3. I can't remember, but it was at some point. And I watched the show and I thought it was great. I mean, season 3, specifically 3B, was by far the best season. Season 1 was alright, 2 was fine, 4 was kind of eh, and 5 had some pretty good parts, but was also okay. I did like the show, I promise. Geez, so what is this movie even about? I guess it's all just a way to bring Allison back. Oh, this is going to be crazy spoiler heavy. This is going to be so many spoilers, you're not even going to know what to do with yourself. But yeah, so this movie is really just a way to bring Allison back so that her and Scott can live happily ever after. And that's the point of it. According to Rotten Tomatoes, though, it's not just pure fan service / the opposite of fan service with a bunch of scenes where people stop arrows in the air. But apparently, Rotten Tomatoes says it has a plot. And the plot is that in Teen Wolf the movie, a full moon rises in Beacon Hills, and with it a terrifying evil has emerged. The wolves are howling once again, calling for the return of banshees, were-coyotes, kitsunes, and every other shapeshifter in the night. But only a werewolf like Scott McCall, played by Tyler Posey, no longer a teenager, yet still an alpha, can gather both new allies and reunite trusted friends to fight back against what could be the most powerful and deadliest enemy they've ever faced. Even though they've literally already faced it, and what do you mean, the deadliest enemy that they've ever faced? They've faced... whatever. Anyway, I'm gonna be blunt. There's very little I liked about this movie. There's bits and pieces, sure, but so much of it felt really disconnected. The writing fell flat. It felt like the movie had a plot and then they just shoved people into the roles to make the plot happen. We need another deputy, so sure, Mason can do it. We need a young werewolf, so Derek can have a son. We need Allison to come back, so we'll do this weird random situation where she can come back for whatever reason. It's not clear. Sorry, I'm already ranting about it when I'm supposed to be talking about what I like. So let's dive in. The title sequence. I did like the title sequence. It felt new while still feeling like the original ones. It was able to kind of accomplish what I thought the Veronica Mars new season on Hulu show did not. Hulu show. The new Veronica Mars on Hulu did not. Anyway, they also tried to reinvent, while pulling at our nostalgic strings, but I did not really like their opening. The song was too different. The visuals were cool, but it was just, I don't know, weird. Teen Wolf did a good job, though. There were characters that I loved. First up is first and foremost Coach. He will always be first and foremost. Because what a character. What an actor. I loved him in the movie, and I really have always just hoped we get more of him in the seasons. So I'm glad he was in the movie, and I'm glad that he got some funny parts. The callback to Greenberg was just like, chef's kiss. It was perfect. I loved it. And it was so good, guys. Probably the best part of the entire movie. So that just tells you how great this movie is. I will talk a little bit more about Jackson later in the other section. But I do love this more chill version that we get. We saw a little bit of it during the last season of the show, but it was nice to see more of in the movie. He seems kind of more like himself, like he's comfortable being who he is, which is really nice. And I guess it's nice that he's still with Ethan, but it's not like we've actually really seen them together, so who knows if they're actually nice together. We'll just assume and say yes, I guess. The sheriff is always great, always. His speech to Eli at the end was really wonderful. Scott's was kind of then that's probably why Eli just walks away. But Sheriff knew what to say, because he's a great dad. And even though they didn't really show it much, I do love Melissa and Argent. The parents were always a great part of the show, and I think that somewhat carried over to the movie as well. They didn't have as much of a role in the movie, but I still liked, getting to see them. There is this part where Eli is running away. It's right after Scott gets him to heal, and a car swerves around him when he runs into the road. And it kind of parallels the beginning of Scott's journey as a wolf, where he first becomes a werewolf and is almost hit by, I'm pretty sure it was Allison on the way into town. And if this movie was written well, it would have felt like this movie is setting up Eli to be the next generation, much like season 4 was trying to do with the introduction of Liam, instead of these random bits that feel like it, but the whole plot does not feel like it. Anyway, it would have felt like they're kind of turning over the leadership mantle, I mean, what is Scott even an alpha for? Where's his pack? Does he have a new one? Are the people he never seems to talk to or live near still somehow in his pack? It's unknown. No one knows anything. Sorry, ranting again. I will get back on track. So yeah, it would have been really nice if the whole movie was kind of using that momentum to set up him as the next generation. Instead, we just get these random scenes that feel nice, but really don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Another scene that calls back to the show is when Allison finally remembers who she is. Yes, Scott is able to get through to her a little bit. She begins to kind of remember and soften up, but it isn't until Lydia that she really gets there. While it would have been nicer if she did more than just scream Lydia, it does kind of do two things. The first is that it's kind of like in season 3A in Motel California, which is the best episode outside of season 3B. Scott falls victim to the motel, right? There's something weird happening there, and he, amongst a bunch of others, are finding themselves in like a pit of despair. And they're all trying to take their own lives. Allison tries to get through to him in the scene, but it doesn't really work. It's Stiles that finally breaks through to him. It's the idea that friendship is what matters, and that's what's really important. And it sucks that they drew this parallel to that scene, and yet they still had no idea what they were doing, or probably even watched the show, because the writers failed to show that friendship is what matters in the movie, right? I mean, no one's friends anymore. No one talks. No one has any kind of relationship with one another, whether it's romantic or platonic. They're all just living their own lives, I guess, and it doesn't really feel like it gets fixed in the end either. Like, oh, they kind of grew apart, but this brought them all back together. It doesn't really feel like that. They were like, okay, we're here for this thing and whatever. But the second thing that they do is that they're also paralleling the part in season 3B where Allison dies. There's that moment where Lydia senses the death of Allison, and she's down in the tunnels and she screams Allison's name. And in the movie, to get through to Allison, she's standing kind of in a tunnel-ish space looking into that portal or whatever it is, and she screams Allison's name, and that's what kind of breaks through to her friend. And it was a really powerful moment in the movie. I wish, I kind of wish that she had done a bit more than just scream her name and, actually showcase that, the friendship that these two women had. But I get the parallels, and it still came across as a pretty powerful and intense moment in the movie. One of the only ones, but still a pretty good one. I do like the bit about Derek not being able to transform in front of his son. It felt like the only other part of the movie that had some real depth to it, some real season 3 quality to it. And of course you realize that they only add it because they're going to kill Derek later. But it was the one thing that really actually made the movie feel real and not just a sequence of events they wanted to happen. It gives more depth to the character. It gives, some information outside of what's literally happening on screen. And it felt like a very, real and touching moment that, Derek has had. And we've seen that his son has been struggling with the change this whole time. So it gives context to that. And I felt like it was actually really well done. Tyler Hoechlin did a great job of acting in the scene. And I really just wish that the movie had more of this. There was another scene, too, where Lydia talks about why she broke up with Stiles. It's in this same kind of, all of these scenes really happen in the span of a few minutes. But that was another intense scene, Lydia, where she's talking about why she broke up with him and how she kept having this recurring dream, and she felt like it could have been a premonition, but she wasn't sure. But the only way to make sure it never came true was to just kind of leave him. And it does have that same kind of feeling of, okay, now we're finally getting a little bit of backstory, and we're finally understanding why they're not together. But it gets undercut by Stiles not only being absent from the movie, but rarely mentioned by any of the other cast. And so it kind of sucks. And I get that, Stiles didn't want to be in the movie, Dylan O'Brien, but they could have at least, brought him in a bit more as the character without actually having him in the film. But because there's this very much apparent lack of him, I feel like that scene doesn't feel as heavy as it could have. I'm just going to say this here because really it's just pure nostalgia at this point, and I'm fine with it happening. But the show was like a series of car commercials, the way that they parked, the use of the features of the car, and the movie is really no different. It's a truck commercial instead, though. There's not a lot of features, but the truck they show is definitely car commercial territory, and I just thought that was funny. And I'll put it in the like because it's very slim. Oh boy, guys. So what didn't I like about this movie? It's hard to really know where to start because there's so many things that were poorly done and bad. But let's start at the beginning of the movie, right? That sounds like a good place to start. Now, I understand the point of jumping into the action as the opening of a movie or a show. Sometimes jumping right in can make the world feel more real. There are events that are already in motion, but it really doesn't quite work in this movie, mostly because this movie already has a before that we know a lot about. I get showing Liam as an established character. We know who he is, we know his story, so it's okay if we kind of jump into his life, but then they shoot this girl that we don't know, and it's completely meaningless to us, the audience, because we don't even know her name until after she's shot. Like, there aren't any real stakes for this character. The only real stake is that, she has the jar, which we are aware of what the jar has, but we don't really care about her. We don't know her relationship with Liam. We still don't even actually know what their relationship is at the end of the movie because they never really speak about it. And so again, later when she's stabbed, you still feel nothing because they have shown us nothing about her other than she's supposed to be a replacement for Kira. And that's it. There's no stakes to her. There's no pressure. There's no, drama or intensity because we know nothing about her, and she's only really a kitsune to join the cast because Arden Show, I guess, they hate her for some reason, even though she was an amazing character and an amazing actress, and it's a really big bummer that they would do that to her. But yeah, I feel like she was just again, like most of the characters in the movie, just a pawn for them to use for whatever they needed. There's no real depth to her. There's nothing. Also, while we're at the start of the movie, let's also just talk about the elephant in the room, Stiles. Dylan O'Brien didn't want to be in the movie, and while that really sucks because Stiles basically made the show, I think we can all agree that he is the reason why the show was as good as it was. That's why, season 5 wasn't as good. However, they still chose to do a plot that really highlighted his absence. I mean, Stiles made season 3B. His character arc in that season was so profound. Doing the Nogitsune without him made it feel, less than, watered down. It felt less dark and less ominous. It lost that psychological thriller portion to it, even though they tried to make up for it, but the trickster portion was kind of I mean, the fact that Stiles is barely mentioned is just a tragedy. They barely acknowledge him or his absence, like I said before. But at least in season 5, they addressed it multiple times when he was absent to do those movies, and then when he got injured. But I mean, Scott doesn't even ask Lydia about him. There's no acknowledgement, really, of him between the other characters. He's only briefly mentioned, like, twice. And then Lydia has a scene about why she broke up with him. And then only Jackson hears that. So did the other cast know? I mean, does Scott know? I get he couldn't be in the movie, but they barely added him as a character. And then they chose to do a story that was, I get, yeah, that's how they're bringing Allison back and tying it together because that's how she was killed. But, like, Stiles made that season really work and made it as good as it was his character and what he went through. And to just not have him in the movie just really took away a really big portion of the intensity and all of the things that really worked well in that season. The scenes where we got Scott and Lydia introduced in the beginning of the movie too are just, they're really weird and pointless. For Scott, he has to come to the scene of a collapsed building because he can, I guess, calm a dog so that he, instead of, the firefighters, could save the girl. And who is Deaton to tell a firefighter that, he knows this guy who can calm a dog, and the firefighter's like, okay, yeah, we'll just stand around and wait and hope that the building doesn't collapse on that little girl that's trapped in there. And then also they mention that Scott is the alpha twice, and it's a really good case to show how bad the writing is, because it doesn't work the first time. Again, like, the writing is just not great, and you can tell that really the second time that they do it is the one that should have been done. The first one is just way too soon. It's when Deaton is telling the guy that he knows this dude who can calm the dog. We call him the alpha. And then Scott steps out of the truck. And then afterwards, the firefighter's like, oh, what do you call him again? And Deaton is like, oh, he's the alpha. And the firefighter says, like a dog? And then Deaton's like, no, like a wolf. And yeah, it's still pretty cheesy, but, like, that portion was really good. To do it like, oh yeah, he's the alpha. We get a glimpse of his red eyes when he's saving the girl. Yeah, this is a great way to introduce he's still the alpha. Not before he's there and we call him the alpha and then he steps out of a truck, but he, hasn't really done anything to showcase it yet. I don't know. It's not great. It's par for the course, I think, for this movie of just not good writing. Like later when they introduce Lydia, she keeps getting interrupted by some dude, but we don't know who this dude is. And yes, we get that, okay, he's trying to interrupt her because the thing that she put together, the little pamphlet thing or whatever, just says Allison everywhere. But they imply that there's a lot more history to their relationship, yet again, never explain anything, which is going to be a running theme for this movie, is that they never explain anything. But he calls her Lyd, and then she snaps not to call her that. Like, why? Did they date? Is she annoyed at him for work reasons? We just don't know. We don't even really know what Lydia does. It's very jargon speak to make it sound like she's, this important person, but it has no substance, much like the rest of the movie as well. It really just feels like we were thrust into the second half of a season with no backstory to help us know where we're at. Like, why is Liam in Japan? Who is the lady he's with? What does Deaton do? Is Scott just working at a shelter? I thought he wanted to be a vet. How is Stilinski still a sheriff? Did they just continue to elect him for like a decade? That seems kind of long. And why and how are Malia and Parrish together, or, at least sleeping together? Who is Eli's mom? If he's 15 and Scott said Allison died 15 years ago, then who is Derek getting pregnant at the end of season 3? Is it Kate? Because gross. Everything in this movie has to be so freaking mysterious. When introducing Malia and Parrish, there's a conversation where they withhold keywords, so we don't know exactly what they're talking about at first. And it's the same with Derek. Can't mention his name yet until we see him. Better just call him a consultant. Also, by the way, Mason is here, and he's only here to be here and has no real role in the whole movie. I'm not saying that we have to know everything right away, but they were really going out of their way to create unnecessary mystery and drama, and it makes a lot of the dialogue sound clunky and forced because they can't just say what they're saying. They have to try to make sure that they're withholding certain words, and which no one would do, and it just makes it really dumb. And, speaking of the writing, the swearing is super cringe. I'm not against swearing, but every time it felt clunky and weird. And maybe it's because the show didn't have it, but I think it was just the excessiveness of it. Writing should have intention. Words are chosen for a reason. How someone speaks is carefully crafted. But certain slang has to be used very carefully, and swearing is part of that. I read something somewhere that Joss Whedon was able to have his character speak in a way that felt, teenagery, without the cringy feeling to it, and it was because he didn't use actual slang, but created a way around it. He has his own Whedon speak, right? You hear his character speak, and you're like, okay, they sound like they could be young, but it doesn't make it super dated, and it doesn't make them, I don't know, super cringy. Like, if you read a book that has actual slang in it, it usually is not done well, and it always makes you feel like, oh, why did they use that word? It makes it date the book really easily because, slang is obviously stuff that moves quickly. And the same is true about swearing. It needs to be used intentionally, and this movie was just throwing it around, and it was very out of place for me and very weird. Relationships. So what was going on with all of the relationships in this movie? Not a single one is explained except for Lydia and Stiles at the very end. We only have Jackson and Ethan still together, which is fine, but much like their entire relationship, it's all off screen. So we don't know what happened to Argent and Melissa, why she can't know he's there, even though later they're in the hospital together and there's not even like a look between them to, hint at like the tension or something. We knew Scott and Malia weren't going to be together, of course, but we get no information on what happened to them, nor do we know why she's with Parrish. Again, we don't know what's going on with Liam and Kira's replacement, Hikira? It sounded like Kira. And even all the friendships haven't lasted and aren't discussed. I don't think Liam and Mason even have a scene together, which is wild, even because, they were like brothers. There's no explanations either. I mean, maybe it was scheduling and that's why they couldn't do some scenes together, but at least give a line like, oh, I haven't even seen Mason, or, oh, I just called Mason. Or, like, you can't have a phone conversation? That could be easy, right? But no one talks to anyone anymore except for apparently Malia and Parrish, even though they probably don't do a lot of talking. And it just is never explained. It's never addressed. They just, like, again, how are they all still looking at Scott as the alpha if none of them speak to each other? How does that work? Here's some random things that happened that had me scratching my head. Allison comes back with a full face of makeup, hair softly curled, and nails painted, but she doesn't have clothes on? Sure, okay. After Eli runs from the school, Derek says they have a plan and that he go to the auto shop, which, why the auto shop? We don't know. Does Derek own it? Does he do the arson investigation on the side? Is this how Eli knows about the Jeep? We'll never know. Anyway, so he gets to the shop and he tries to get gas? Why? Shouldn't he be running to safety and like trying to hide, not stopping to top off his tank? It makes no sense other than to try to get a cool shot of Allison exploding things and him running away. Anyway, Jackson, he's coming back. Jackson never uses his powers. His eyes glow once, and that's it. Like, why bring him in if he's just there to make some snarky comments and not actually do anything that anyone else could do? Like, I guess he's trying to fill the role of Stiles with the snarky comments, and I guess that's why he's the one that puts together the puzzle, even though Lydia has literally always done that to her own drawings, but sure. Why not? But also, like, there's a point where Jackson is being, he was shot a couple times, I guess, by the chemistry teacher, which I'll get to, but he doesn't think to use his tail or claws to go after the chemistry teacher. I mean, he literally, in a scene earlier, is like calling everybody's attention to the fact that he's got, these claws and tails, and he can do all these things with them to, Argent, as a way to be like, hey, I'm introducing this thing, but then they never come out. It's kind of like there's this principle in I think books, TV show, in movies and stuff like that, where if you see a gun, it has to be used later on. Like, that's a thing in writing. And yet he speaks about his weapons, and yet we never see those weapons. Why bring it up? Well, just to remind people that he has the capability, but apparently he won't use it even in a fight. And again, he literally gets shot twice and then is apparently incapacitated, and he now can't even defend himself against a person who, I'm going to check my notes here, is probably human. Even though he was dead and now somehow, again, never explained even a little bit, but I guess he just can't fight back against a human dude who was dead and is now alive. And, okay, sticking with the chemistry teacher now, this whole plot of this entire movie hinges on him wanting revenge? And that's why he looks for the Nogitsune? You'd think he could come up with a much simpler plot to get revenge, which, again, doesn't make sense that he wants revenge, doesn't make sense that he somehow came back to life and sought revenge, and also doesn't make sense that his first thought was, oh, I'll get the Nogitsune to do it. How does he even know about the Nogitsune? He wasn't even around. He died in the beginning part of season 3A. We'll just add it to the pile of things that don't make sense and are never explained. So Lydia says that the burned trees at one point become mountain ash. So how are the supernatural creatures walking all over it and through it? Shouldn't it be like a barrier or something? Or do they need to do extra stuff to the ash to make it like the magical mountain ash? Again, we won't know because they don't explain it and they don't go into detail and they just mention it, and then why does he need I guess he needs the mountain ash for putting it around. Look, there's a lot of things that are loosely tied together that are never really fully fleshed out, and this is just another one. And then this one's really funny. They have Scott, who's 12-ish, 13-ish years out of high school, go into the game to win or something. Let's have lacrosse for sure, because that's a big part of the show. But maybe we should be focusing on Eli, since, he's an actual high school student. I mean, what was the point of Scott even being in there? So they could hurry up and win? But isn't it timed? Does it matter if they win quickly or not? Because it should be a timed game. And why would people leave if they won? Because then wouldn't they want to stay and celebrate? None of that makes sense. But again, like I said earlier, is if this whole movie was trying to set him up to be the next generation, then it would have been nice to have Eli, score the winning goal and all that stuff. But then they still include Scott. So it's still like him, reminiscing about his high school years and when he was the leader of the pack and stuff, rather than just, setting it up for the next guy. Why? Yeah, you gave Eli Scott's number, but why are you putting Scott in the game? He shouldn't be in the game. It's just so dumb. But again, everything is just so they could, showcase this scene and, do this and that, and none of it really means anything. At the end, Allison shoots Scott in the heart because the Nogitsune says he'll free the rest, and we're just gonna skip over the fact that it's literally a trickster spirit, and taking what it says at face value is dumb. But anyway, they go ahead and do it, shooting him in the heart, which I will say the 3 little arrows in his heart with the blood kind of look like the Triskelion thing, or whatever it was called, the little swirly thing, and that was actually kind of cool, but I don't know if it was done on purpose, because that's a level of detail that I don't know if they could ever actually consciously do. But anyway, so they shoot him in the heart, and then immediately reveal that the Kira replacement's Kitsune jumped from her body to his body to protect him, I guess, even though, no one is safe. So they accomplished literally nothing by shooting him, and maybe they weren't counting on the fox spirit to save Scott and thought that he would actually die, but they didn't even wait to see if the others would be set free. and be like, okay, JK, Scott's fine, but we'll just continue to try to fight you like we were earlier when it really wasn't working. So none of this mattered except for we got to show that this girl's a kitsune and that apparently it can leave her body and protect Scott. I guess that was the point of the scene, because the point of the scene was not to try to save the other people, obviously, because there was no attempt to make sure they got set free. I also don't understand why Derek had to die at the end. It felt very unnecessary, like the majority of the movie, really. But it felt like they just wanted to make Derek die as an alpha, and it was dumb. Like, you're gonna leave your kid behind? Why? He could have just, like, let go. Like, he could have let Parrish burn him a little bit, and then when he was weakened, walk away, maybe? Does his, like, fire stuff actually hurt wolves? I can't remember. But it seemed dumb, and, like, I guess I could see how that could turn him into an alpha, but it just seemed, I don't know, pointless. The whole plot was a little bit all over the place. I mean, it felt like fan service fan fiction, while also not at all being what the fans actually wanted. Like, every scene was catered to what lines they could say or what cool poses they could achieve. Like, I mentioned all of the scenes, right, where they kept grabbing arrows out of thin air. There were so many of them. Like, the whole movie was just trying to find a way for Scott and Allison to be together, even though it made no sense. Like, did Kira mean nothing to them? Obviously, the answer is yes, so we won't even pretend like that was in question. But not only is she basically replaced in this movie, but they then cheapen the relationship that she and Scott had. Like, yeah, Scott didn't need to end up with one of his high school girlfriends. He could have been with anybody else. But they literally had him keep a picture of Allison in his wallet for 15 years. When did it get in there? When Argent gave it to him after she died? Did he put it in there while dating Kira? After he graduated? Has he been pining over her this entire time and moving it from wallet to wallet? It would have been way better if he found it at his mom's house and then put it in his wallet then. Like, saying that they're rekindling the spark that they had. Not that the fire never literally went out, even though he supposedly loved Kira. He even tells Allison in the movie that he's still in love with her. Not that he's, never stopped loving her, which is fine, because she died and, you always have a special place in his heart because it was his first love and blah, 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 blah. But being in love with her still, that seems a bit of a stretch. I mean, they weren't even together when she died. But yeah, I mean, that's like the entire movie is that, the creator obviously wanted them to be together and manufactured this ridiculous way of them being together. It's not explained how Argent knew that there was a special thing or how to get the sword or, I mean, they kind of go into detail about it, but it's still never really explained why it had to be this full moon. Why now? Was it just because the Nogitsune was released? We don't really know because nothing is actually explained in this entire movie. There's no information. I don't know what this movie was. So yeah, wasn't really a fan of the movie. It wasn't great. It didn't feel the same as the show. It had little to no substance. And there just, like I said, wasn't a lot of information about what they've all been up to for the 15 or 13-ish years since they graduated high school. Can't remember how many years passed after season 3. But it's been over a decade, and we know literally nothing. The characters barely interact with each other outside of the main plot, so we don't get any kind of fill in the gaps of, oh, what have you been up to? What do you do for a living? Why did we fall apart? Why are we not talking to each other? Where do you live? Like, if you like the show, you might like the movie, but you might also not, because you don't really get any answers from it. It's just, hey, do you want to see a movie where the characters exist in it? Okay, then yeah, you might like the movie. And there you have it. Those are my not quite positive thoughts on Teen Wolf, the movie. Thank you so much for joining me. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Mixed Media Reviews Podcast. Please leave me a comment and let me know if you agreed or if you have any questions. You can also find me anywhere you find your podcasts, probably.
Please join me next time where I'm going to be talking about a couple YA sci-fi novels, or series, I should say, and that's the Illuminae Files and the Starbound trilogy. These both are written by Amy Kaufman. The Illuminae Files is also written with Jay Kristoff, and then the Starbound trilogy is written as well by Megan Spooner. So yeah, have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye!